We're on chapter 12, which is business projection and plans. You'll see that chapters 12 and 13 are a pair, where 12 covers the concepts and 13 covers more of the details. Start with an introduction, then common types of projections, followed by some traditional practices and why they fail, and then some best practices, again, before we move into chapter 13. FP&A and businesses are expected to develop and evaluate projections. That's what we do. We need to be able to guide the ship. Often they're treated as just exercise, not really for fun, but you get the point that they're not taken seriously. Major decisions, including some painful ones, rely on these projections, so they need to be taken seriously. Unfortunately, many factors necessary for these projections to become reality are not in your control. The economic environment, societal changes, competitive actions, market tastes and behavior, and technological advances may change your entire plans unexpectedly. Last but not least are the personal motivations of managers. They may try to counter your organization goals for their selfish interests. For example, they may try to lower the budget so they could beat the budgets, make a big bonus. So now you see that it's difficult and nebulous. So with all that, why bother? Well, it's kind of like you're driving. You're on the road in a car and you're driving in the fog. So you have to do the best you can, knowing that there is some risk in where you're about to go. How can you do this? First, you have historical data where you see in the rearview mirror, it looks like a nice straight road, whereas in front of you, it's a curve. So historical information is important. We always look at it, but don't believe that you could just extrapolate and get the right answer. Next, we're the managers. We have our hands on the wheel. So we have our gauges and dials, and we need to drive and make judgments as they arise. Even though you may not be able to anticipate everything, that's why you have control. That's why you have the gas pedal, the brakes, and the wheel. And finally, on the right, we have our gizmos. The gizmos could be technology, could be artificial intelligence, or it could just be data analytics that you have about competition or the industry at large. This is a great quote. It's been used so many times because it's such a great quote. And this is from Dwight David Eisenhower, who was the general in World War II and also became American president. In preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And that's such a beautiful quote because we know that whatever we plan, reality is going to dictate where we go. And it's impossible to anticipate all the things that will occur. However, the act of planning will enable you to be ready. And as those changes arise, you'll be able to adapt and move forward as if you had a plan. And that's the beauty of planning. It's not that the plans will always work out exactly as it is, but the act of planning will enable your managers to react to the different scenarios as they present themselves. So the outcomes of planning are identify the key assumptions and drivers of the business. If you understand those two, then you now have a way to create a radar and watch what's happening, again, to give you a little bit of an early warning system as to what may be occurring. Secondly, a monitoring process. If you have these items you know you need to track, the metrics, again, will give you some insight into where you're going before the actual completion of the quarter or the month. And we can anticipate and how to react because by doing the planning and the scenarios and the high side, low side scenarios, we can then see and react quicker without having to go back to the drawing board. And finally, gaining consensus is really important. So it's not your plan, it's everyone's plan. Then the people contributing to the plan are committed because it's their estimates that got folded into the plan. Senior people who have validated and accepted the plan have now essentially promised support and resources to enable that plan to occur. This will also show the linkages between departments. Often we see the businesses run as silos. You have production completely different from the finance people, completely different than the marketing and sales people. Planning enables us to be able to have this discussion across disciplines to break down some of the barriers imposed by these silos. And ultimately, the goal for management, there's a more likelihood of us achieving the plans. Secondly, we could create incentive plans to reward good performance and highlight bad performance. And finally, we have a higher chance of meeting our strategic goals, which is our objective anyway, to move our year in, year out performance, to move toward a longer run plan for the company. So we have many different types of projections. This is only 4 groups of projections. We're obviously talking about budgets, so budgets are one, and they could be operating budgets, they could be cash budgets. What we're calling them in this course are operating plans. We'll explain why it's not just a word, there's actually meaning behind the use of that word versus the word operating budgets. Forecasting is we're underway during the year and someone asks you, what's the year look like? And you could be a board member asking you that in a board meeting, and you're, say, 3 months into your year. A forecast is looking at the past, and those are actual, then forecasting the rest in order to get some overall feel for how the year is going. So that's how we're going to use the word forecast in our discussions. Then we have long range projections. These could be for strategic planning. It could be for capital investments. It could be for decisions that come up and they require, because of their importance, some analytical work behind making that decision. Or it could be on acquisition, where we do analysis during the screening, valuation during our discussions and negotiations, and then integration once we've moved forward with the idea that we want to merge the two companies. Then there are a whole collection of special purpose projections, which will support day-to-day decisions, like should we lease or buy our equipment, or should we make or buy our subcomponents or final products. And pricing, if we change pricing upward, we should measure the impact on our profits. We know that most things have some level of price sensitivity, so an increase in price would typically have demand go down, and we want to gauge what is the optimal pricing strategy for our company. And finally, what are our channel strategies? How are we going to sell and distribute our products? Through others, in the case of distributors or retailers, or direct by way of web presence or direct sales. All of these could bear some analysis because each one of them has operational, financial, and strategic implications. Traditional practices in projections and specifically for budgets look like this. Departments prepare budgets for the next year before the year begins. The senior management, including the CFO, reviews, discusses the revisions, and they essentially negotiate for what optimally will be best for the company as a whole. Then senior management, once they're comfortable with it, will present and recommend it to the board, and typically the board will discuss some and make some tweaks, but probably not major revisions, and get it approved. And those are all activities that happen before the year begins. Otherwise, you're starting the year without a plan. Believe me, that happens too. But that should not happen. We should have planning set, agreed upon, so everyone's ready to go. So when the year starts, the gun goes off, and we go. Then the year starts. Now we're underway. Let's say the month of January ends, and you have actuals. You immediately can compare your actuals to what you thought would happen. Now you're getting the value of the budget. It's not only the process, it's that we're able to create a guidepost so that we can monitor if things are going as planned, better, or worse. And this is typically where reality sets in. Oh, I thought we were going to get so many sales. It didn't quite happen that way. This is the importance of having guideposts every month, not waiting till the end of the year to see how you did. Why do budgets tend to not equal actuals? There are three major buckets of things that could go wrong or right. Could be upside too. The first is at a macro level. We could look at our old friend Steeple and say, well, there are societal changes that we may not have anticipated. There are technological changes, some innovation that changes behavior or the way in which the product is delivered or received. Or economic impact. We are in an economy, and whether we're going into recession or inflationary periods has some impact on most businesses. Then there's the environment. There are changes in the environmental laws or just the realities of functioning, say in a smoggy environment versus a clear environment that may have behavioral changes in our production or our customer behavior. Political unrest or political elections all have some bearing on the policy and future of the company. And legal matters, whether they're lawsuits that are precedent that may affect you or new changes in regulations. And finally, ethical practices. And these are hopefully things that are more stable, but there are some ethical practices that we are more aware of things over time, and those new levels of awareness may change behavior. The middle are, again, an old friend, Porter's Five Forces. And these are like check boxes, we can think of them. They're just ways for us to not miss anything big. Sometimes we're in the heat of the battle, and we're not really considering all the things that matter. So we're pulling back at some of the high-level things that we want to check off, that we consider the implications for our planning. Competition matters, of course. Are they increasing prices, decreasing prices, entering new products, withdrawing from the market? These are all relevant to your products and services. Suppliers. Are there shortages of key inputs to your production process? Are there price increases or decreases based on what the suppliers are facing from their suppliers? Customers. Behavior of customers is critical. Where do they go to buy? How do they make decisions? These are important matters that ultimately they have immediate impact. You'll see your market share change to the good or to the bad. You'll also see their behavior change. People vote with their feet, or in some cases, their money. So they have a whole array of choices. Which one do they choose? Is it your company's products or competitors? Within your product lines, which one did they choose and why? Each of these has bearing on your business, and you can't fully know what they're going to do. New entrants. You may be sailing along in a comfortable position, and all of a sudden you have a new entrant. It could be from someone just ancillary to your business moving in, or it could be a complete new entrant from a whole out of the blue location. So these are things that occur, maybe not every single year, but you need to be aware and cognizant when they do appear. Finally, substitutes. We have media. You might think that your movie business is so good, and all of a sudden there's a thing called the internet and streaming video. So there are substitutes. We may have a nice bound industry, but all of a sudden there are substitutes available, which again alter the choices available to consumers. All these are outside of our control, but there are some inside of our control, which also can go awry. We set goals based on what we want it to be, not what's really probable of happening. Secondly, there is risk analysis that we sometimes don't fully anticipate. We see what we're trying to do, but we don't actually do enough of the risk to react quickly as situations change. Kind of the whole thing that Eisenhower said. Then there's this inherent optimism of the people that are making the goals. If you ask a salesperson, what are you going to do next year? They're going to have some big number because they think they're so great and they're so persuasive. And then you roll them up, and now you have a collection of optimism. You present it to your boss, and somewhere along the line, we need to tamper that from being optimistic to realistic. The goal is to be realistic, not high, not low, just what we expect. We'll do the variations, the sensitivities, the scenarios, but let's have our base case be that. What do we expect to happen? Then there's this insidious behavior that's natural human behavior. Hey, let's lower the expectations. It's kind of like a hurdle. If you can make the hurdle go down by about 12 inches, there's a higher chance that you could jump over the hurdle fast. So this is a natural human tendency or temptation to lower the expectations. So back to the boss asking a salesperson, oh, what do you think you're going to sell next year? Oh, I think I'm going to sell $500,000 worth of product. When they in their mind know they could sell $1 million. Why do they do such things? If the budget is set as 500 and they do what they think they will do of $1 million, they'll seem like a star. Wow, I doubled my expected output. This might lead to commissions or bonuses or promotions. So we have to guard against that behavior because it again counters the whole objective of a realistic estimate. Finally, and related to perhaps to the prior one, money's at stake, whether it's at a salesperson level, as we just mentioned, or at a manager level, who might get some compensation or bonus consideration for high growth in sales, high profit generation, or high cash flow. All of these might taint the objectivity, and worse than that, alter assumptions so that they give you numbers that really aren't their best guess. These are a collection of a dozen best practices. We're going to go through each of them in turn. Some of them are sequential, some are just pervading the entire process, so we have to look at it each in turn. First one, projections are not just a finance exercise. This is part of the reason that we don't like the word operating budget as much as the words operating plan. Managers should realize that they are expected to deliver the budget. They will not be able to accomplish that if we just do this as numbers on a spreadsheet. They need to be engaged in developing the plan, and then the plan drives the budget. Seems logical, but a lot of budgets are done backwards, where they do the numbers and they fit the activities inside the budget. That's not really the proper methodology. And they have to be detailed enough with levels of action so that we can implement those. For example, if we're in charge of marketing and we said, oh, our marketing budget should be $20 million. Whew, I got my $20 million. That doesn't say what media are you using, what are your messages, how frequently are you going to run, where you're going to run. So these things are important for a marketing plan. The proper way, of course, is to do it the right way. Develop what plan you think will deliver on the objectives that you're asked to deliver. Then see what is the price tag for those activities. That way you have a number, but without some underlying estimates. You now have a series of media timing, expenditures, and you can trim up or down based on what you've already done instead of just having a block number. So the first is, let's take it seriously, not just a numbers exercise. Second is trends. Past, as we mentioned, we look in the rearview mirror, it matters. Past should inform our future. It doesn't dictate it. But if we have been going downhill for a number of years and all of a sudden we expect to go up, what are you doing to justify that change from a downward trend to an upward trend? So historical data provides us some reality. Third is top-down versus bottom-up. We use that term a lot for different things, but in this case, it's who's driving the decisions or who's making the decisions. Top-down is senior management dictate where we're going to be. They say what our sales and profit are going to be and go make it happen. Bottom-up is where the bottom percolates up, it gets to the top, but there's no coordination between the different departments to make sure everyone's integrated in their thinking. So the obvious best practice is to have a give and take where there's some indication from the top, their objectives, some bubbling up from the bottom of what they can do, and see how those can be in concert with each other. That is, of course, the best thing to do. Then once it's kind of integrated this way, you integrate this way so that finance talks to production, talks to marketing, talks to sale, so that as they put their plans together, there's some integration between the different departments. That's the best practice. Step 4, this is the detailed one because now we're getting into the numbers. We first have to have a frame of mind where we know where we're going. It's not just, we've always been in this business, this is what we've always done. Well, that's nice to know, but where do we want to be? Senior management has some thoughts on that matter. So you ought to have that in mind so that your plans align with their goals overall for the company. You may or may not like what that means for your department, but that's still not your decision. The decision of senior management is to drive the ship as best they can, allocating resources into the direction that they see is the best for the company in the long run. Then we have to anticipate competition. We don't know what competition is going to do, but we know what they've done, and we may have some guesses as to where they're going. This is important to consider. We also should look at the same from the customers. What they've done is important to know, but what do we anticipate? What changes do we see in the offing? Also, the market. The market may change. The markets might change for the inputs to your goods. If you're in a business where your products depend on a limited supply input item, that would gate your progress. If you need screens of a certain size for your phone and there's a shortage of those screens, you can't sell cell phones without a screen. So we have to be aware of what's happening on the market price and the availability of products in your supply chain. Finally, it may require money. You might say, oh, we can take over Europe without really realizing that we have to get a budget for us to enter Europe. So all this kind of fits into play is that not only do we have our operating decisions, that may also entail some investments necessary to go along with that strategy. Finally, there are things that are in our economy. Every year there's something happening in the economy that took us by surprise. Is inflation changing? Is the currency rate changing between us and the source of our products, or between us and the destination, the customers for our product? These are important considerations for us to have. Now notice all of those are perspective. So we have that in our mind, and now we go do our work. So in the areas of revenues, now we have some market indication. What do we think will be the growth rate this year? How do we think our market share will move? Are there segments that behave differently? Are our segments that we've targeted going to have higher or lower than the general market trends? And pricing, what do you think will happen with pricing? Again, we're sometimes a price taker, not a price maker. So we have to anticipate what pricing levels we'll see. While we're taking these considerations into effect, we have to estimate the range. We have an expected and a high low. It's good to capture these now so that we can use them as we look at sensitivity analysis and scenarios. Are there new products that are coming to the market from us or our competition? And where are we in product lifecycle? Are we in the beginning, the growth phase, maturity, or decline? As we saw, product life cycles are a reality of life. We can sometimes extend our life, but there's a certain natural reality of a product life cycle. How is the market going to be impacted by the economy? So we have the considerations. Now we're applying them to our projections for, in this case, revenues. Cost and expenses, similar types of things. Is there inflation in our input items? And what are they? What are they? Are they raw materials? Are they labor? Are there healthcare regulations that may change the cost of our labor? These are just examples of inputs into our cost model. Next is, what is our head count? This is an important matter for all companies. Are they growing in head count, staying stable, or do they need to trim head count? Might as well have that discussion now, because those are some of the most important decisions a company can make. Then there is financing and the cost of capital. Do we need more money from the outside, in debt or equity? And where do we get it from? These are perhaps not at the department level, but the CFO's department is definitely going to be looking at this, as are the board and the CEO. If we need capital, does that mean we should lower our spend? Or are opportunities so great that we need to find a way to obtain that capital to take advantage of opportunities that are presented to us now? And what are the expectations of those sources and the costs? Costs are very clear in debt, whether it's from a bank or a bond. Expectations are from the equity markets. We don't mind getting stock sold into the market. That's great. But we need to know the expectations of the market so we don't have this issue where we're selling stock only to disappoint, which causes a collapse in our stock price. If we can be in sync with our shareholders, that will ultimately be a great benefit to our long-term price. And are we looking at our business model and increasing the risk? Increasing leverage, as we know, increases risk because now we have more interest expense that cannot move. What else is happening given all these changes in our revenues, our costs? Are we seeing a different operating leverage for the company, for example? Steps 5 and 6. 5 is identify and research and test these assumptions. You've identified the big drivers of the business or assumptions we make about the market. Let's create ways to test those. Let's look at the past for the data. Let's look at early indicators for what the future may hold and consider those inside of our assumptions. 6 is let's link all of what we just talked about into incentive systems. We have budgets that include revenues, expenses, profits, cash flow. As we tie those through into our normal reporting, income statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, we now move into the area of compensation. If we can tie, to some extent, the performance of the company and the departments to the incentives, the bonuses, or the commission rates, these are things that will, again, push us toward accomplishment. Because if we align our interests of the company and the individuals in there, then we're more likely to have everyone pulling in the same direction. An example of the level of granularity of some of our systems is, let's say we see that our ratio for day sales outstanding is too long. It's taking us too long to collect our receivables. You don't want to just dictate, make the DSO go down. That's ultimately the measure. If we're going from 60 days to 30 days, that's an amazing accomplishment, but you don't snap your fingers and do it by dictate. So what are the components that might lead to us moving and earning the right to get it from 60 down to 30? They may include things like the credit policy. Let's re-examine who we extend credit to. Maybe the problem is that we're a little loose on credit. We're giving people with a history of slow pay because their businesses are not that robust. Let's trim back and only sell to ones that we believe will pay us on a prompt basis. Secondly, what are our collection procedures and our escalation practices? Our collection procedures are based on our contract. Do our contracts have very clear language about the expectation you will pay in 30 days? And are there consequences if they don't? For example, if not, there's a 10% late fee, or there is an interest charge for every month you're late. That creates an incentive for the customers to pay you on time. If you just say, pay me in 30 days, and you fall silent, they say, I'll tell them I'm going to pay in 30 days, then I won't, and they won't charge me anymore. It's a very different behavior than if you say, here, you're going to pay in 30 days? Oh yeah, I'll pay you in 30 days. Perfect. I'll put it that you're going to pay in 30 days, and if you don't, then there's going to be a charge because you broke your promise. Maybe not that way to say it, but that's exactly what's going on. Therefore, I have to have a late fee or an interest charge or both. Oh, okay, sign, right? All of a sudden, that alone will change the behavior and bring down from 60 toward 30. The others is the collection process. If they're late, do you let them know that you're watching? You'd be shocked. Some people just will pay what's called the squeaky wheel. Whoever calls and complains, they get the check because we don't have enough money for everybody. If you don't call, guess what? You don't get the check. So the escalations and the collection process will again drive you from 60 back down toward 30. Then there's customer satisfaction. There may be a reason they're slow. Maybe they're not happy, or maybe they're waiting for resolution of some issues. Look into the legitimate reasons other than not having cash where your customers are not paying you. There may be something you do to set those issues aside so it would unblock them paying you. And they would be things like quality or dissatisfaction with the service or performance of your products. Then there's the whole speed of resolving issues. We can measure satisfaction partly by seeing how fast we resolve issues. If someone calls with a performance issue in the product and it takes you a week to resolve it, guess what? You're probably going to get your money a week later than you would hope. However, on the other hand, if an issue is raised and is solved either immediately on the call or within 1 day of that call, first, your respect from your customers will jump, but furthermore, now they'll hopefully show appreciation by paying you a little faster. So I'm going through this particular example to say a number, a metric is great, but there might be some metrics underneath it that will also allow us to drive the performance to accomplish the objective in that bigger metric in the first place. Step 7 is let's make sure we evaluate the projects. The first graph on top is what I was saying earlier. We may be on the blue line over here, and these are actuals. And then if you just extrapolate, again, without any thinking of what is changing, if you simply extrapolate this line, it goes like this. It keeps going down, right? All of a sudden, the budget or projections look like this, looks like orange. We have a word for this. The word is hockey stick. You may or may not play hockey, but I hope you know what a hockey stick looks like. You have the blade of the hockey stick and you have the shaft of the hockey stick. And a hockey stick looks like this, right? And we always laugh about it because reality is you're going down, 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 and your projections are going up, up, up. So beware. Anytime you have a hockey stick, be ready for some cynical audience member like me to say, time out. How are we going to go up when you've been going down for years? That's an important thing. And you ought to have a good answer to it or don't do it. The bottom one shows a method for us to monitor, and it takes a little explanation, so hang with me here. The first column right here on the left is year to date. So we have actuals year to date. Great. Let's create some benchmarks to compare how reasonable it is for our forecasting. So the next column right here, the second one here, is year to date last year. So let's say we're doing the first quarter. So first quarter year 2, and we have a number. That's the left bar. Then let's say, well, what happened first quarter of last year? And if first quarter of last year is higher than first quarter of this year, that's a warning sign. Oh, early results aren't good. We're forecasting growth, but in the first 3 months, we're not only growing, we're going down from last year. So how are we going to grow, right? So obvious question. The third bar is year-to-date plan. So we have our actuals. We have last year. What did we plan? In this case, again, not a good story. We have planned this. It is not only lower than where we were a year ago for the same period of time, but it's lower than our plan. So this is a serious set of red lights that will have us stop and say, what's going on? Other ways to look at it, on the right side, are rest of year. So instead of where we've come, say, where are we going? Under the current performance, the rest of year, just by subtraction, is we're going to need a lot. That's why this bar is so high. Because of our somewhat slow start, we're going to need to make it up. That's why this rest of year is high. We might look at, well, what happened actually in rest of year last year? Because maybe there's a natural seasonality where it's always higher in the future. Didn't happen here. The rest of year is nowhere near where our projections are. So again, red light, we're seeing some issues. And how about our plan? Our rest of year plan that we said even before we started, we didn't even expect to do that much in the rest of the year. So these are red light, red light, red light, red light, red light. We have 5 red lights, which means the actuals indicate we're at risk. Step 7 is let's evaluate our projections. One thing to do, pretty easy, is to say, okay, let's just look historically. Where did you forecast and where did it end up? These orange bars represent the range of the forecast. These circles represent actual. So we were way off in Q3 of 2015. Then we were dead on in the fourth quarter. Then we underperformed, then over, then on, then over, over, over. So in the course of the number of years, we're showing an increased ability to forecast and meet or exceed the forecast. In fact, arguably, this looks like what we call sandbagging. Sandbagging is a term that we use often to say you've kind of under forecasted so you could beat it. Maybe this poor performance here caused some talking to, let's say, so that management now knows that they better meet or exceed their budgets. This concerns me a little bit because it shows that we're systematically, or we may be systematically under forecasting. And again, our goal is not to set low hurdles that we could easily jump over. We want to set realistic numbers. So perhaps there's a little bit of gamesmanship. Or it could be they're just great, right? So it leads to a question, not a conclusion. Step 8 is, all right, let's specify what was underlying everything, those assumptions, and those will lead to some upside, downside scenarios. Here are some of those scenarios. Whenever you see the word event, this is leading to more of a scenario-based test than a sensitivity-based test. This is out on an Excel sheet. I'll hop out in a moment, but let's just cover what we're going to see. So we're going to gather all the assumptions, list what are the ones that we're a bit unsure of, then let's capture them. And this is what this is. It's upside and downsides. Then let's have an explicit decision. What happens if that event were to occur? How would we know that it's happening? So this gives us a warning signal to watch. What are the events that would be evidence that that has occurred? So in this case, the first one, the project is extended. So there's a signature. All right, that shows an extension. And here are the quantified inputs of what's happening in the business. What is the impact in dollars? Overall, what's the probability of that happening in the event that we are not exactly on our plan? And then use a weighting factor to get to the answer. We'll do this in a moment. So the sheet shows that we simply create this column to quantify what is the financial impact, usually in profit. What's the profit change if these two things were to occur, like we have extensions of contracts or new contracts, but there's some downside risks. Let's say what those are. We lose a contract, or a recession hits the economy, or there's a licensing issue that happens. So we quantify along these rows to see what's going on. What would be a leading indicator? What would be the event that says it's here? What is the impact in dollars? And what's the probability? Of course, this column represents the things that would be away from our base plan. And we see that we have probabilities of 19% for an upside and 81% for a downside. That should make you a little nervous. That we could identify some upsides and downsides, but there's more downsides than upsides. But the good thing is this is a planning tool. So we have management action. If that were occurring, how to take advantage of the upside to get that profit. And on the downside, what are our actions if the downside were to occur? How would we mitigate or address head on that particular downside? These are really important. Again, this is the Eisenhower comment once again, is the planning enables us to be ready. As these scenarios occur, we've already got some contingency planning because we've considered what do we do if it occurs. An essential aspect that illustrates the value of budget. Step 9 is sensitivity analysis, where we have the large assumptions that have big impact on our profits. Let's test that across a range, high and low, based on what could occur. Again, if we have an expected case, we might have an opinion on what are the high and low bounds of what we think is going to happen. And this is somewhat of a statistical measure. We could do some things rigorously with data and projection models, or we might just have a feel just of the business. And again, I've noticed over the years that meeting with experienced professionals, they often have a feel for the business based on their experience and observations, what has happened in the past. So whether it's data driven and projection, very sophisticated, or the judgment of your key personnel and manager, you'll be able to do some level of sensitivity analysis. Step 10 is scenarios. We just saw some of those scenarios, and they're the upsides and downside scenarios. Now we're going to put them all together along with the base plan. This is an example of the base case, and then 2 of the upside scenarios and 3 downside scenarios. We then assign in this case we're doing revenue projections. We assign to the revenue levels a probability. Again, always they add up to 100%. When we do the expected value, then 113 is our expected value for revenues. Notice in this case that the downside scenarios outweigh the upside. Therefore, it pulls down from the expected level of base case, which was 115, down to 113. So if you were to say, what's our expected case? The answer would be 115. If you asked a different question, what's our expected value? That means you're weighing the probabilities. Then you would say 113,750. Step 11 is let's tune the business model. In the book, the term business model means this. It is a financial statement that is the outcome of your business model. The reason I say it that way is I've used the word business model or the term business model to mean a graphical depiction of your entire business. Where do you get your product? Who are you? And what do you do to push it out down the value chain to your customers? So here we're going to, of course, use the book's definition. And I just wanted to call it out that term business model may be used in different ways, quite different ways, actually. First column represents 2017. So this is what just happened. It's the actuals. Second column, the preliminary is let's grow just by that same 8%. And if nothing else changes, what happens in the way of revenues, profits, and metrics with that simplistic move of let's just repeat 1 year forward. We're now in Excel, so we can look at the specific changes that went from the simple roll forward 1 more year to what we think may happen. First is that notice that the change went from 8 to 10%. We believe we can grow more in 2018 than simply what happened between 2016 and 2017. Next, we're forecasting that because of new product that we're going to have higher cost of goods sold. The effect on gross profit is that we're the same, coincidentally. We had our costs go up, but we also have revenue go up, so they offset each other. Next, we'll see that the SG&A was still at 32%. However, the R&D expenditures is projected to go up because we're going to increase expenditures to start developing for the future. The other items you see in blue stay the same. On the balance sheet management, we're looking at ways to look at day sales outstanding to speed up the collection, similar to what I was saying. They're going from 73 days to 65. Still not great, but better. So we'll take better. Next is day sales and inventory. We used to sell in 146. Again, we're going to do a little bit better to 140. This will also improve our financial performance. This is now balance sheet management. It's our ability to be frugal and lean in how we finance our company and getting high productivity from the assets we employ. The bottom line of all this for the upcoming year is that our return on equity will go up from 17 to 22, and our return on invested capital will go from 15 to 19. Wow, that's pretty good. How did that happen? It happened because we've addressed two different areas of improvement. One is the performance from the income statement by way of increasing sales and our cost changes, mostly driven by increase in sales, frankly. Next, we're saying what happened on our balance sheet, and we have two initiatives that will go to increase our productivity. Those in combination drive up our ROE, which is based on shareholders' equity alone, and our ROIC, which includes not only the equity, but also the debt. So the ROIC includes in the denominator equity, bonds, and any other form of debt. Next, and finally, we'll go to step 12, which is let's present and communicate our plans. It's not okay to just have a plan, stick it in a drawer, and bring it out next year to compare how you did. That would waste a huge opportunity. What is that opportunity? First is let's check off that the plans are in line with our strategy. If it's not, then we did something really bad. Senior management has a strategy for a purpose. Our goal is to make sure everything we do moves us toward where we want to be. Second is to make sure that we've considered all the market forces. Step back and make sure there's an indication of reality in your budgets. Next is we've identified the critical assumptions. We can put in place monitoring mechanisms to see if those assumptions are holding true. Then there's things that we can do, critical success factors. These are like the management of inventory and receivables. We have that in our control. So let's create, again, ways to measure and encourage the accomplishment of those internal addressable items. Next is a plans. Like in the marketing example, are we executing on our advertising plan? We don't have some big number. We also have in January, we're running these ads. In February, we're going to contract for this series of ads. This is how we could then use the planning, not only for financial, but down to the actual actions. Step 6 is the risks. We are aware of certain risks. We identified about a half a dozen of those. Let's watch for those early indicators. Are they popping up or not? If not, that's great, but you've at least explicitly watched for them, not just waiting for things to happen. 7 is your sensitivity analysis. Will give comfort to the people looking at the plan that not only do we have a base plan, but we also have kind of where it could be on some critical assumptions. So we know, again, what to look for and why it's so important. And finally, we have scenario planning, which is very important because it's not going to be exactly as we expect. So this bit of planning is especially important because now we're on the lookout for things that occur, upside or downside, and we can then act quickly to either mitigate a problem or take advantage of an opportunity. So these best practices collectively lead to much better process with better results as far as the actual plan, but even more importantly, are more likely execution and the ability for the rank and file as well as senior management to all be on the same page. Wouldn't that be nice? It doesn't always happen, but these are steps that, if taken, will lead us toward that bigger goal. Chapter 12 then, summarizing, we introduced just the complexity and difficulty of any forecast. Then we looked at a list of different forecasts that we're going to do, including budgeting. Then we jumped right into budgeting and said, why do these practices fail? And finally, we have some best practices. So not just doom and gloom, we also have some suggestions, if followed, will lead us to a better place. Thank you.